Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I have a full review to do for you on the Protech Cambria. Now, this, to my knowledge, is the first button lock flipper that Protech made. If there's another one out there, it's out of my peripheral. Not sure what it is. But this one is a really interesting knife. I had seen a friend get one of these before, like pre-Mordax, before the Protech Ferrum Forge drop Mordax was a thing. I had seen a friend get one of these, and I thought it was intriguing, and then I totally forgot about it. This wasn't a design that really spoke to me all that much, although when my buddy got one, his had a really cool wooden inlay on the handle, and it had a mosaic pin button, which was pretty cool. It was kind of dressed up, and I thought it was a nice knife, and I still think it's a nice knife. Stylistically, it's not my favorite of the Protech button lock flippers. If you watch my comparison of the three, this, the Mordax, and the Malibu, you'll see a little bit of my comparative thoughts on this one compared to the others. But I'm really glad I've gotten to experience it. This one was loaned to me by my buddy Matt, who goes on Instagram as @CuttingEdgeGear. I will link to his Instagram down below so you can check him out. I imagine a lot of you guys are probably already aware of him if you are in the Instagram knife community. He's a great dude. And he loaned me this and his Mordax because I no longer have mine, so that I could do that comparison and just check him out, and I really appreciate him doing that. So thank you, Matt. So the Cambria, I'm not positive when it first launched. I don't think they're making any more of them at this time. It may be a model that makes a resurgence at some point, but I think it's out of production now, from what I understand. What I want to talk more about than its timeline, and I'm not a specs guy, I just want to talk about how this knife feels to me. I've done very limited paper cutting because it's not my knife, and it's not one that I really felt much of a need to test, but I've done a little bit of just seeing how the edge does, and I've had it in and out of pocket a couple of times to feel how it carries just around the house, and I've tried to be very gentle and nice to this knife because it's Matt's, it's not mine, but I have felt it out sufficiently, and I've had it here in my possession for over a month now, I think, and I actually really need to get these knives back to Matt. But the Cambria is put together really, really well. The Mordax I loved. Really, really liked the Mordax I got, and the Malibu is one of my favorite knives that I've ever bought. It's just really, really good. I love the Malibu so much. And so it's been interesting to kind of go in the wrong order, never having experienced this, but having experienced its successors prior to it. And so there are some differences that I can sense just in the way that this functions, the way that it feels. Overall, the construction is, we're playing with the same materials, right? So it's the same game in that way. We've got aluminum scales that have been hard anodized black. We've got a 154 cm blade. In this case, it happens to be DLC coated. This version of the knife, as you can tell, is all blacked out. Even the hardware is black. We've got the push button right there. We've got a flipper tab right here. On this side, you'll see we've got the Protech deep carry clip, which I love, 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 love their clip. And then on this side it says Cambria Limited, PR1, which means production run 1, number 77 of 200. So this knife is numbered from a run of 200, and I like the all-black aesthetic. I dig all-black knives. I think it looks good. The clip is playing the same game here, which is a beautiful thing. The clip itself is set down into the scale. They've milled out a pocket for it, and then the screws are flat-faced screws that have been countersunk into the clip itself. So if you look, you can see everything about that is just as flush as can be. A lot of clips that are loop over style. Underneath the clip, you'll find that the scale isn't machined down for it, so you get a step up for the layer of the clip, and then they'll use button head screws that sit on top of that, so you get another step up for the screws, so you end up losing a couple millimeters of that space, which is a pretty limited real estate between the top face of the clip and the face of the knife. So I love that Protech makes these clips this way. It's my favorite deep carry clip for sure. the way that they function, the way they go in pocket, the way that they feel. It's a great clip, and this has that. So in terms of like the features of this knife, other than the Mordax and the Malibu now being in a different blade steel, those are both in 20 CV. This is 154 cm, so that would be the only real material difference here. And I think part of that is just the timeline of when this knife came out. Protech still uses a lot of 154 cm. In fact, my SNG, the hand ground one, which I'm going to be doing a first impressions on here in a minute, that one's 154 cm. They're still using 154 cm a lot, but on some of the newer models that have come out more recently, I like that I'm seeing them use 20 CV. So if you ask me objectively which steel is better, 154 cm or 20 CV, I know people don't like it when people say one steel is better than another, but 20 CV is a better steel than 154 cm. Assuming they're both heat treated properly, assuming they're both ground well and have a good edge on them. I know there are a lot of factors, but in terms of the composition of the steel and its performance, if it is treated right, I believe 20 CV is objectively better. Does that mean 154 cm sucks and is the worst steel? No, it's fine. I just bought that super expensive Protech SNG in 154 cm. It happens to be one that I don't plan on cutting with, so there's that. But anyway, the other two manual flippers that I've experienced from Protech have been 20 CV. This one's 154 cm. Beyond that, the only real discernible difference, other than the obvious being design, and we'll talk about design of this knife as it stands alone, but I think it's important I think more people at this point have probably experienced a Mordax or a Malibu than have experienced one of these, and they're probably wondering about this based on their experience with those. So the one thing that I feel is most different between this one and those two, and I talk about this a little bit in the comparison, is the way that this action feels. This is still fairly snappy, but it's a much lighter detent than you feel on the Mordax and especially on the Malibu. The Malibu is the most crisp button lock flipper I've ever played with. The one I have is just exceptionally, like the pop that you get when you pull that flipper tab. It's so good. On this one, it's good, but I wouldn't call it so good. Like, if the Malibu is like a 10 out of 10 on action, this one's like a 7 out of 10. It's still very good. It's still satisfying. And if I had never owned or experienced a Malibu, I'd probably be really excited about this. But compared to the Malibu and even the Mordax, this one is the least tactile. The detent, you can see I just did it. It's possible to fail this one much easier. If I kind of push button it softly, it's not going to deploy all the way. If I light switch it, it's every time. And the way this flipper tab is shaped and even has a little bit of jimping on it, it feels like it's supposed to be light switched, not push buttoned. But even if I do push button it, if I just push it right, it goes out reliably. But I will say, it's just not as crisp. That's what it boils down to. Still good, just not mind-blowingly great like the others. So, other than that, all of our differences are the design of the knife itself. Like, this, shape-wise, is radically different from the other two that I mentioned. Generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of, like, canted handles like this. I don't know if cant is the right term, but that makes sense to me. So, the way that it angles downward, aesthetically, I don't generally choose knives with that type of shape. I feel like normally I'd pick a handle that goes more out straight from the blade, like one line, right? This swoop down, to me, aesthetically just isn't my favorite thing. But aesthetics aren't everything, and as I found out when I put this knife in hand, it actually feels really, really good. The angle that it puts the knife into your hand, and there was a surge within the last couple of years, and I feel like I've seen it kind of die down, but there was a surge of like self-defense, like tactical knives that were slanted like a pistol grip and had maybe even a more dramatic downturn here, and they were like little fixed blades that people would appendix in waistband carry, and it grips like a pistol, so it's kind of intuitive for like a fighting knife. I never really played with those much. There may be some merit to that, there may not. I feel like I've seen it become less and less abundant over time. I feel like that fad kind of came and went. But this kind of has that sensation where the way that it points the tip and the edge feels a little bit more tactical than a typical knife to me. The way that, like, I don't know, the grip it puts it in, it just feels defensive to me. And I might be crazy. I'm not an expert, but to me that's the sense I get from it. Which is funny because when I look at this knife compared to the Malibu and especially the Mordax, I feel like this one looks, it's all black, so it's kind of a bad example, but this one looks, in terms of its shape, the least tactical and the most kind of like classy. Like, not my style of classy, but like it's like the dressed up one to me. And I don't know, it's interesting because it feels the opposite of how it looks in my head. I've got like this disparity, but I really like the way it goes in hand. And the limited amount of cutting that I've done, albeit very limited, and I'll be the first to admit that, the angle has actually been very nice. It kind of reminds me of the Spyderco Tough. This is a very different knife from the Tough, but the Tough also has a handle that kind of swoops down like this, and it puts the edge in a certain angle for you. And this one, with the blade shape as well, it kind of, I feel like the point of contact with any material I'm using this on, the intuitive spot where this is going to land and make first contact with the material is kind of right on the belly. Like, that's where it makes sense to me to push. It's like that line right there. And so it's just a different like type of cutting, I feel like, that comes with these angles. And so it's cool to experience. I actually quite like it. So yeah, overall I feel like it's a fun knife. It's different, it's cool. And one thing I mentioned in that other video, I feel like I'm saying that a lot, but I talked a lot about this knife in that video. I think that this knife, especially now that they're not making it anymore, and now that Protech has gained a lot of popularity specifically with their manual button lock flippers, I could see this knife being kind of scarce as it is now, going up in secondary value over time, especially if Protech keeps playing that game, keeps coming out with more manual flippers. I think people are learning to love that type of knife from Protech, and rightfully so. I adore that Protech is making manual button lock flippers and that they're hitting it out of the park like they are. So I can imagine these will become quite sought after if that trend continues and people keep falling in love with that lock type, because a lot of people, they want to have the lineup from Protech, and this is part of the manual button lock flipper lineup from Protech. It's just one that, in my opinion, kind of slipped under the radar for a lot of people. And the reality is, like, if I had one of these and I put it in pocket as my carry for a day, I could see myself really, really liking it. I haven't done that type of testing with this one. So this is a full review, and it isn't like some of my full reviews are, because most of the time my full reviews are based on a substantial amount of use to the point where I feel comfortable speaking from experience. That hasn't really happened here, but I've done enough to have some confidence saying that if I were to carry this knife and use it, I think I could find myself really liking the way it functions. Because I definitely like the ergos. I like that everything is smooth. I like that the only jimping on the entire knife is this super minimal jimping right on the flipper tab. I don't know if you'll even be able to see that that's jimped, especially because it's all black. But it's just the tiniest little bit of really tight, non-aggressive jimping that just gives you traction right here on the flipper tab. And it's like everything else about this knife is smooth and buttery, and even the action with this like a little bit less crispy detent, the whole knife feels smoother. Like the whole thing is swooshing at all times, both in shape and in feel and in function. It just feels very like kind of fluid in a cool way. And I don't know, I would like to own one. If I find one for a decent price on the secondary, I imagine it will be hard for me to say no, because they're really cool, very well-made knives. And Protech has been doing it right on button lock manual flippers for longer than I think people realize. At least for me. The first I noticed really cognizantly and like gave my attention to the fact that they were doing button lock manual flippers was the Mordax. Even though I had seen this one, it was outside of my mind. So I don't know. Hopefully this is valuable for those of you who didn't quite know that it existed before, or who are interested in a button lock manual flipper from Protech. Maybe this is more your style than the Malibu or the Mordax. That's totally fair if it is. I happen to prefer the other ones stylistically, aesthetically, but if you're someone who this speaks to, then like with confidence know that it's a very good knife. The tolerances are tight, the centering is perfect, the action is fun, like it has a great clip on it, a good profile, it carries well, the ergos in my opinion are excellent. It's very, very nice. So I guess that'll be my full review of the Protech Cambria manual button lock flipper. Thanks guys.